September 17th is a day most Virgin Islanders will never forget. It was a defining date for many. Life on the islands till this day is categorized as pre-Hugo and post-Hugo. Today, 20 years later, TV2 presents Hurricane Hugo, The Longest Night. We're joined with the show's producer, News 2's Michael Nissman, who's here to give us a sneak peek of the one-hour special. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
So I know it was a lot of work behind the scenes. Just tell me a little bit about what was your inspiration to do this special.
Well, after 3 months of work, TV2 presents Hurricane Hugo, The Longest Night. The documentary is a collection of heartbreaking, intimate stories of those who endured the longest night and survived to tell the tale of torment, tribulation, and triumph. This clip you're about to see takes us back to the approach of Hurricane Hugo. You'll hear from residents who took the storm lightly because they didn't know better. For 60 years, these waters were a mist of any catastrophic storm. The last major hurricane to hit the Virgin Islands was in 1928.
I remember folks mentioning that something was coming, but I don't remember any sense of urgency or anything like what we experience now.
Well, it was calm. I mean, prior to Hurricane Hugo, I mean, when we hear that a hurricane is coming, it's never that serious.
I was born and grew up here, and I had never seen and experienced a hurricane in my life.
Yeah, we thought we were going to go surfing the next day, and we did actually go surfing the next day, but we thought we were going to enjoy surfing the next day.
There was a feeling that some way that we would have been spared, you know, from the hurricane. A lot of people didn't believe that it would have actually hit us.
It wasn't until it really got close, the day of, I would say, when people really started scrambling.
The only thing we kind of really did to prepare for it was my grandfather had put up some wooden plywood boards on top of the glass door, and I don't really remember if we had much supplies. I mean, we really didn't know what to expect.
People had said, well, put tape, like put X's on your windows, okay? As if this tape was going to stop a 200-mile-an-hour wind from blowing out, you know, windows. But nobody knew anything about shutters or things of that nature.
Our house was indestructible, right, because it had a concrete roof and was fully shuttered. And we actually were planning a hurricane party. The whole thing was a party.
A couple of days before the hurricane, my wife and I were felled by fish poisoning. So naturally, when those winds began to blow and we were very weak, could hardly get out of the bed.
You can't comprehend it. It's like trying to describe to someone what war is like, you know? You could say, well, you know, it's dangerous and scary and all that stuff, but unless you go through it, you don't know it. And there was very few people around that remembered what a storm could do.
I remember it was maybe like late morning, early afternoon. That's when the wind started to pick up. The sky changed gray, and it was like somebody flipped a switch. It was very, very frightening.
Now, most of us who were here remember that, and you know, we're reflecting on it. Again, I want to ask you, what was your inspiration to do this special? And we know it's a 20-year anniversary.
Well, Sandy, the idea began June 1, the start of hurricane season. I was sitting in Vitima's office, actually at the desk of Jacqueline Heiliger, assistant director, and there were these yellowed newspaper clippings before me, totally out of place from your usual desk items. As I began to read through them, I realized that they were clips of Hugo, and on the date line was 1989, and that this year, 2009, obviously marks the anniversary of Hugo, and I knew then that I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what or to what length. And very early on, it became apparent that this story was bigger than me, and as it was shaping up, I knew that this had to be a story told by those who endured the storm, the quote-unquote survivors. Therefore, you will not see me anywhere. You won't hear my voice. There's no narrator. Instead, the entire piece is told from their perspective.
So where does Hugo stack up to all the other recorded hurricanes in history?
Well, that's an interesting question, Sandy, because Hugo at the time was the costliest storm between the Caribbean and the Carolinas. More than $10 billion in damages. 90% of the buildings on St. Croix were either destroyed or severely damaged. Now, since Hugo, other storms have surpassed it on the list of costliest storms, and Katrina tops the list. But it's difficult to compare Hugo and what Katrina did to the Gulf Coast. I went through Hurricane Katrina as I was living in New Orleans in 2005 when Katrina came barreling down. And also, I went through Hugo as a child growing up on St. Croix. The difference between the two is in New Orleans and in other hurricane-provoked parts of the U.S., aid is readily available. On St. Croix, there was no communication to the outside world. Total isolation. You could not drive to another county or across state lines for help. We're talking about an airport which guardsmen had to form a human line across the runway to clean debris. We're talking about a hospital where patients were brought to the parking lot and to sidewalks after the roof collapsed. And so fear gripped the island, and many will tell you that the aftermath was worse than the actual storm because no one knew if and when help would come.
Thanks for that, Mike. Now you can catch Hurricane Hugo 20-year anniversary, the longest night, in its entirety right here on CBS TV2 on Saturday, September 19th at 7 and 11 p.m. and again on Sunday, September 20th at 11 a.m. with an encore presentation on September 26th at 7 p.m. where you're going to bring you another sneak peek of the show in Friday's newscast. Great job. Thanks for that, Mike. And 20 years ago, but it seems like just yesterday.
Certainly does.
Thanks for that. Stay tuned. There's more news too coming up next.